but I'm going to try. Since I've known him since I was 3 years old, and he's been with us since then. And I've said it before, but it's kind of embarrassing for me that Chip had to come and tell Abdul's story because I never saw this story, even though he was right in front of me for many, many years. So bad journalism on my part. But I'll start with Abdul. Abdul, sounds that you've heard, what makes you shiver, get scared when you think back on the different sounds that you've heard? What are some of the iconic ones that bring back memories for you?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank everybody who are in here. And secondly, you're still too young. I start with my age mate. Thank you very much for bringing me up here. Although I didn't prepare my speech, I know I'll fumble, but the sound that still on my head is the sound from Rwanda and Southern Sudan. This is the sound that is still up to now. You have seen me shedding tears here. That was because one of the sound man was killed. While I look, his body was not in a proper way. Secondly, the house which was burned in Southern Sudan, and the body. So this one, it will never fade up from my memory.
Patrick, on your side, one of the things that really hit me about your interview in particular is when you talk about the phrase that resonates, I think, with a lot of the screenings that have happened, is the animals bit, that why, we are much worse than animals. Things that you will never forget from the things that you've seen, and maybe a story about Abdul that makes you smile at least a little bit, since you spent so much time together.
There's so many things that I would talk about that I will never forget. Coming from places like children dying of famine in places like Somalia, just because two people want to cling to power and they've got their militias fighting each other and they forget that there's human life out there. Things like seeing a child without hands. They've been chopped off in Sierra Leone trying to plait a doll's hair. And you wonder, I mean, who would do this to a little 3-year-old? I mean, in the documentary, there's a comment I make about a 3-year-old, a 3-month-old baby. I mean, how extreme do we get? I mean, animals will only do this in self-defense or in defense of their young. Or they will go out and kill because they're hungry, right? Which is just nature. But to devise these ways of skewering children or getting someone like this gentleman here to kill his entire family, because you're given the option, shall we rape and kill your children in front of you? Or do you want them to have the easy way out? You kill them, and then we kill you. And then what they do is, they go ahead and make you kill your family, and then they let you go. I mean, you're going to be mad for the rest of your life. I mean, you can't live like that. And these were things which, for me, I said, don't try and say we are like animals, because animals don't do such things. Abdul and I, there's that incident where we are being bombed, shelled, and we were lying next to dead bodies. We laughed about it later, but at that moment it was not funny. Where we say, you know what, if our parents knew what we were going through, they would say, come home for the rest of your lives and we'll feed you for free.
Did your family, let me interrupt this, sorry, did your families, both of you, did your families ever realize prior to seeing this film what you actually do for a living? Did it actually sink in what you guys have been through?
Not particularly on my part. I mean, I think
yeah.
it's the
On
same
my
for Abdul.
part, I think my wife still want me to continue. I've heard what she said. So I think I'll continue. But anyone here who wants a gardener, I will I'm ready to do the job.
Gardening soundman.
Yeah.
Okay,
then,
let me move to Chip.
Well, I was just going to mention one thing related to that is this is the only, it's the second time we've done an event like this with the four of us on stage, but it really might be the last time. It's hard to say. But one story from the first time was when we were in Nairobi, actually with Jim and Sue Town, who are here tonight too. And at the end of the screening, Patrick's daughter came over to talk with me specifically. And she just said, thank you for making the film, because she was 20 years old and she was in the womb at the time of the genocide in Rwanda, and she had not heard these stories at home. So this was really for her, the daughter, it was the first time she was hearing about her father's career and the types of work that he did and the danger that he put himself in to be able to tell these stories. So there's the spouse, but there's also the children. And I think maybe your family also experienced that.
For me, I have 4 children. 3 of them were born while I was not at home. One was born when I was in Somalia. The other one I was in Rwanda. The other one I was in Sudan. So this little one, who is now closer to me, and he's trying to be a journalist, because the second born, I took him to media house, to media school. When I went to Rwanda, I think last year, was it last year or early this year? When I came back home at around midnight, the following morning I asked, where's the boy? Well, his mom told me that he's in police academy. So he left media house, media school, go to academy. I myself, I was trained 2 weeks in a police academy, but later on I find out I'm not the right material for that job. Because one, the instructor will come very early in the morning at 4:30. They will order you. They will just shout, recruit, recruit all the time. Then I said, I'm not the right material for this thing.
So you decided to go work for my
So
dad. And not get shouted at.
I decide now I'm not going to work. I got a chance to go to Camera Pigs, to Mohammed Amin's. So the first day, Mohammed also shouted, and then I told him, I'm from police academy. The instructor was like you, so I don't want to work. I took my jacket. I carry my jacket. I left the office. He sent one of the guy after 1 week to go and look for me in Kibera. So I went back, we compromised, and then up to now I'm there.
But tell me about your wedding, Abdul. You know, your wedding day, because you didn't tell that in the story, or Chip didn't put that in the film.
I didn't include it in the film, but it's a great story.
Yeah. During my wedding day, my cousin is somewhere around here. He can also tell. My wedding day, especially the first day of the wedding, I was on the street covering riot with Mohammed Amin. We covered riot for hours and hours, and he told us to go back and celebrate. And when we reached home, he told me, okay, now you can change from jeans and the camera jacket, put on your suit, and then celebrate. I said, thanks, I'm not going back to the street. After 40 minutes, he came straight to me and said, okay, go and change again. We are supposed to go and film the riot because news can't wait. Wedding can wait, but news can't wait. So I went back and changed, and then I went back to the street.
See, you should have stayed as a policeman, Abdul. You should have stuck as a policeman. In Africa, you make much more money as a policeman as well. Trust me, much more money.
But I was not the right material for that job, sir. Because
Mohammed stopped yelling at you?
yeah, after that, we are just like a friend now.
Chip, why make this film? I mean, what you explained a little bit earlier on about hearing Abdul's story while we were in Ethiopia, not mentioning that we used to wake up at 12 o'clock and stuff while they were up early, but that's another story. Why make the film?
Well, there's from a production perspective, having been a filmmaker for a long time, I've always found it interesting that the sound man, I started in news, and the sound man usually gets very little credit, but they're there, and in many cases, they're more of the eyewitness to history than the photographer is, because the photographer's usually looking through the viewfinder. They see a very limited window. And a lot of times the correspondents get all the press and all of the accolades, but the sound person, I think in many cases, and certainly in Abdul's case, they're the real eyewitness. But the second part of the story was getting to know Abdul personally and seeing his sense of humanity and realizing that he might be in a position to articulate these atrocities better than certainly better than I could and better than most journalists I know could. What happened during production that was unexpected, I don't know if we've talked about this, but when Abdul did break down over the crisis in which 4 fellow journalists were lost in Somalia, that was the 3rd time we had discussed that. And I learned a lot in the production because the first 2 times we discussed it, we were speaking in English. And I knew so much more about what had happened in Rwanda than I did about what had happened with that incident in Somalia. And so we had talked about Rwanda on numerous occasions. And that 3rd time we did the interview, we switched to Swahili. And the entire interview changed because you were speaking in your native language. And when we got to that part of the story, there were 3 other people on the crew with me, all of whom knew Abdul much better than I and worked with him much longer than I, and none of them had heard that story told that way. So it was an interesting thing. Just by changing the language, it opened up the opportunity to really share the individual emotional part of that story. And I know Patrick has insights into that story as well. But the humanity that you bring forth in that discussion, I didn't expect it. And it was, I think it's the heart of the film in many ways.
I'm going to open it up to the floor in a second. I just want to ask, how many are working cameramen, women here? Put up
Or
your hands.
soundmen.
Anyone, cameramen, women that operate at the moment?
Faridon.
Yeah, Farid.
He's being shy.
Yeah, he's being shy. I know. but okay, good. It's a question I want to ask because we're in the Frontline Club. John talked a lot about the sacrifices that many journalists have made over the years, and we don't use soundmen these days. We very rarely use sound engineers at all. It's 1-person crews. Has this? I'm throwing the question out. If anyone on the panel wants to answer, it's fine. Has this compromised the safety of journalists around the world because there isn't that person to watch their back? There isn't that person to look after the camera operators while they're filming. Is that one of the reasons that we have lost so many of our colleagues over the last few years, because budgets are cut and there is no longer any money to send that sound engineer? And have productions suffered in the process? Is the quality of the product worse than it was before? So I'll just kind of throw that out here, but if there's any questions, please feel free. Or not. Please don't keep making me talk.
Oh, the one thing I'll throw out, and it might generate some discussion from you guys, but a lot of times there's a story to be told that where people may not be willing to tell it on camera, but they might be willing to tell it on, with just voice. And so you oftentimes get into places where you can be invited into someone's house with an audio recorder, and that's it, and get a really terrific story. Certainly in the field, I can't imagine it not compromising the safety of journalists.
Tim. Wait for the mic, Tim, because it's being recording. The entire world wants to hear your dulcet tones.
No, I was just going to say that unpredictably I'm responding to something you've asked about 6 weeks late. Sorry about that. No, but in answer to your question, I think it's very difficult to know if it is more dangerous to be without a sound man and just to be a kind of one-man band thing because the whole nature of conflict has changed so much. So I don't think you can separate the two, or certainly I can't.
So you think that because of the nature of conflict now and the way wars are run,
Well, the
or
way
operated,
journalists have been changed in it or are perceived differently in it is a very different thing. You know, back in the day, we could go to lots of places and we were kind of, you know, not holy people in any which way, trust me. But, you know, we were untouchable in many ways. And if you got in trouble, then it was unlucky. Now, it's lucky if you don't get in trouble, I would say, to some of these things. But I actually just wanted to ask a question. In the movie, you mentioned the Interahamwe called you to the church. And I hadn't heard that before, and I find that really interesting. Did they specifically want to show you this? Did it happen frequently? You know, how did that work?
Well, the first day when we arrived in Kigali, because we went through Burundi, we found them on the road. So they took us to Milcolin Hotel. So every morning they will just come dance around that area, and then they will tell us, today we are going to kill people at this site. So for that day, they came and said, we are going to kill people in the church. So if you want to come and cover, just come. Because they were protecting us. We were moving with them because they were the strongest side. So we went there 10, 15 minutes after they started these killings.
And can I just ask, did they single your crew out specifically, or was it just an open invitation?
Well, because we are the first journalists there, so they knew that this is the only journalists around here, and they invite us to go and see what they are doing.
and there's another side to that, which Abdul you mentioned to me before, was they thought you were Tutsi first. When he first arrived in Rwanda with Shafi into Kigali, they thought you were Tutsis.
Yeah, when we arrived first, because I was in the middle of 3 white people, then they asked me, are you a Tutsi or Hutu? I said, I'm a Nubian. I'm not a Tutsi.
And they didn't believe you.
So until I gave them my passports, press cards, and the Kenya national ID, that's the time they were comfortable with me.
Yes, further.
Abdul, for this, thank you. On the same question that Tim asked, if they invite you to go to, that this is where they're going to do their next job, so to speak, what would happen if you said, no, we don't want to go, number one? And number two, by going, were you encouraged them, were they being encouraged to carry out the shooting because of the presence of the cameras?
Okay, I know it's not right to go with them because that is like advertise what they are doing. But on our part, it's for our safety.
I think if I may add to that, Faridun, there is two sides to this. One is, it was no secret that thousands of people at that point, by day 2, which is when these guys came in from the south and I came in from the north, everyone knew, the whole world knew that thousands of people were being killed, right? And if the only way you're able to show the world that people are being killed is by actually going with the bad guys, maybe it's for the better. Because whether or not you go, they are still going to be killed, right? The same way, I mean, I'll now push forward to, or rather go back to 1993, July, when the 4 guys were killed, our colleagues were killed in Mogadishu, right? The Americans had spent about 4 hours shelling this building where there were Somali elders, right? And one of the guys came out, who we trusted, right? Came to the Sahafi Hotel at K4 in Mogadishu and called our journalists and said, come and see what the Americans have done. Now, any journalist would follow these guys, right? And the people who followed ended up dying. right? So even in this case, these guys could have gone out, and maybe it was a trap, and they died, but at least they ended up showing what was going on. Yeah, some of the first pictures you see, there's a long shot, you see people being chopped in the distance, right? And then all the bodies all over the place. And that told the story. Unfortunately, in the Somalia case, it went the other way. You got there and the mob turned against you. There was more people than the guards who had called them to go and see what the Americans had done, and they just turned against the journalists. So there's two sides to that, and I would have done the same thing these guys did. I would have gone, and I would have done the same thing the guys in Mogadishu did.
It's a little bit linked to what you were saying, and also something that you said in the documentary about Somalia, that you said something that you were there for the people, reporting like the things that they were happening to people, and those same people you were for, they were the ones beating up to death journalists. So I work on protection of humanitarian workers, and I was in Libya after the revolution, and I left because I'm going to get killed. So my question is, what drives you to stay there when you see that kind of nonsense of situation, that you are there for the people, and is that very same people the ones that may harm you? Can I have another quick one?
Sure.
It's something you said at the beginning about how good a sound man is as an eyewitness. So I was wondering if, Abdul, you've been called to testify, because you've been in a lot of countries where, like ICTR, so you have they run the tribunal, and some of the footage you took that will make very good footage to be shown in trial, this as linkage evidence or something. You've been also in Sudan. There is an investigation going on in the International Criminal Court. So have you ever been called to testify? And if you are being called to bring testimony to a court, will you be willing to, or do you think your duty as a journalist doesn't go that far, it's only reporting it? Thank you.
Sorry. Well, I'm a journalist, and if they call me, I will not go. Because I'll just send them a picture, the footage, for them to judge by themselves. But I can't go.
But it can't be authenticated if you don't go.
Pardon?
It will be useless because the judge, the prosecutor, wouldn't be able to authenticate that piece of evidence.
Well, because that is not my job. I'm not a peacekeeper. I'm a journalist. So if they want to witness, they can get peacekeepers, UN peacekeepers, to do that.
I believe this is more of a legal issue than more in our direction. Yeah. What we believe in, and this has happened before in the past. It happened to us in South Africa. It almost happened to us in Kenya at some point, whereby the government will want to try and compel you to provide material relating to a certain event. Now, what we've been told legally is they can use whatever we broadcast, right? Because we put it out into the public, because we believe it was genuine. Unless anybody can prove otherwise, they can use that. But they cannot come and compel the person on the ground to go and give evidence or to go and be a witness, right?
Well, yeah, journalists have a special status. Like, you wouldn't be called to testify generally to the ICC unless you want to, just because you could compromise your source. But, I mean, it's the same problem we have with humanitarian workers, that they're generally at the front line. They make very good eyewitnesses, but then they are not willing to testify because somehow it will also undermine a little bit their mission, which is different, to bring justice. Their mission as a humanitarian worker is providing relief, and your mission as a reporter is to report. But I was wondering if any of you would be willing to, it's a little bit, if you put in the balance, well, your duty as a journalist or as a reporter and your duty as a human being who has witnessed egregious crimes. So it was a little bit to throwing out there if you think that you are a journalist over everything and your mission is different.
I just to add to that.
I'm not criticizing the decision at all. Sorry, just saying.
To add a little bit to that discussion too, and you sort of alluded to it as well. The nature of conflict has changed significantly, but so has the nature of journalism. So we're seeing a lot more citizen journalism than we've ever seen, and more advocacy journalism than we've ever seen. And in those cases, it's that their perception of their own job is to highlight and then be a witness to whatever atrocity it might be. You saw it in Tahrir Square. You've seen it, in a number of conflicts. But that's a little bit different than the way I think we were brought into this particular profession, and the ethics around that have also been different. And in many cases, I didn't particularly do it eloquently, but I talked about the fact that journalists very rarely have any kind of protection when they're in the field. That's been one of the real eye-openers for the citizen journalists who are out there now with iPhones or any other kind of device. But they have a different goal.
I want to,
Yeah.
as soon as you're done,
Sure.
I just want to get Jim there because he's got a legal opinion there.
Perfect. I just want to ask quickly. So you have children. What do you tell them about human beings, given what you've seen? Just drawing on what you're saying about humans, what do you tell them to trust people, or how do you reconcile in your mind what you've seen, and then what do you teach your children about whether to trust people or not trust people, or what makes someone bad or not bad? What conclusions have you drawn?
Well, I'll talk about myself personally, because, like was mentioned, my daughter was born in 1994 in October, and I just come through the Rwandan genocide, and I'd seen children killed, I'd seen children displaced, I'd seen children, former ministers, former high-powered people living in refugee camps in then Zaire, just across the border, and queuing in the morning for porridge and maize and beans and whatever. And like I said, this is not what I would ever want any human being or even any child growing up. In my opinion, two guys in a uniform carrying guns, they can blow each other to bits. I don't care, because that's what they signed up for, right? But when you start targeting civilians, children, old, young, women, then suddenly it's a completely different ballgame. So when I come home now, right, and I find even in my neighborhood, you try and talk to people. I talk to my daughter. We talk a lot. Right now, we've got even more dangers now. We've got, the social media is completely. Somebody wants to befriend you on Facebook. You have no idea who they are. They might put a pretty picture of a handsome young man or whatever they are. There could be some old geriatric who's got other nasty ideas in his head, right? That's even more dangerous. So we talk about these things. We talk about, you go out socially, what are you going to have? Are you going to have a drink? Is it going to be spiked by somebody? Are you going to be smoking weed, snorting something or the other, injecting? All these things are there. And I think, in my opinion, if we want to be straight with each other and very direct, these are things we have to confront, because society changes, we have to change with it. In the old days, my father would put me over his knee and beat the hell out of me. And that would be it. Tomorrow I'd not repeat whatever I'd messed up about. But now I think we just need to talk, because even if I do that and you go into your room and you pick up your tab or your phone, you can do whatever you want. Unless I want to monitor it 24/7, the best I believe is to have trust in each other. And that's my side of how to deal with children and families.
Abdul, how do you interact with your kids?
Well, for me, I used to tell them to respect people, because I've seen in Rwanda a small Hutu, his or her mom will just tell him, you see, this Hutu or Tutsi, they are bad. They have killed our people since 1950s. So don't respect them. In 1994, I saw small boys and girls in a police cell that a Hutu killed Tutsi, and he's 12 years old. So it's the parents who are bad, because if you say this tribe is this tribe is this, then whenever they are growing up, their mentality will be this.
I'm not going to ask you, Chip, because you just talk about me. Bad things that I do.
I'm such a good influence.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, great influence. Before I answer or address the legal question and your question, ma'am, I wanted to, we had seen several ideations of the documentary before it was shown in Nairobi. And so I had the privilege of sitting in the row with Patrick's children, and right in front of us were Abdul's children and his wife. And I didn't look at the film, I watched them the whole time because, you know, you wonder, what do parents do when they go to work each day? And I saw for the first time in all of their children's eyes, they were clueless about what their parents did, what incredible human beings they are, the lives they saved, probably hundreds of thousands of lives by exposing genocide and the excesses of humankind. And it was just amazing to watch these children because every single one of them, you guys didn't see it, but every single one of them was trying to choke back tears. It was just incredible. It was an incredible experience for me. It was the best gift of the presentation. Now getting to the legal issue, I can answer it this way. You wouldn't be compelled, regardless of how you acquire the information, to disgorge it in the United States. However, I would point out this to you. It's never the legal issue, it's the practical issue. If you guys had gone to Mogadishu, and then you'd come out and advocated about the horrors that went on there as one group did this, when you went to Rwanda, you probably wouldn't come back. They can't take a position. They really can't, because at that point in time, that's their last mission, for them certainly, and most probably for anybody else who assumes that role to expose these excesses and the insanity that seems to go on. So that's my 2 cents, whatever.
I've got 2 questions too. One was, the woman behind me asked it, and I think it didn't get answered, which was, in the film you said, you know, it's the people that you're trying to show that are killing you. What's the point? And I just wondered if you had thoughts about that, whether it's just a rhetorical question or whether you do feel sometimes what's the point. And the other question was about living in Kibera in the slum. And quite early in the film you said that your children weren't going to stay there. And I just wondered whether you meant you were moving now, or you mean when they're grown up they won't stay there? Because you're living there now, right? And the children are living there now.
Yep. Kibera was not a slum when I was born. Kibera became a slum after independence, because Kibera was given to our great-grandfather by British. So British government as their pension after First and Second World War. There were, I think, 300 or 500 families. So after independence, the politicians brought a lot of people to help them for election. So now it's a place where people like me, okay, I can stay there because I've got maybe 2-3 years in the world, because I'm too old and too tired. So for my children, I'll have to move them out of Kibera.
So you're planning to move in 2 or 3 years and take the children?
Yeah.
I just didn't quite understand.
Before
He's
I passed
planning to
away.
die in 2 or 3 years.
Before I die.
A lot of the issues there are around the ownership of the land in Kibera. It's in the center of Nairobi, and it's very valuable land. But his ancestors were given that land, and now it's literally gone from 4,500 acres to about 450 acres, and I think it's the most densely populated place in Africa at this point.
I understood that from
Yeah.
the film. It was well explained. I just literally wondered. I didn't understand the thing about you didn't want to bring the children up there, because obviously you are bringing the children up there at the moment. So I wondered what your plans were.
You still want me to answer the other
What
question?
about, is
Yeah.
it worth it? Yeah.
It's a good question. It's a good question. No story is ever worth dying for, that's for sure. Something. I mean, my father was gung-ho, crazy man, journalist that went everywhere and did everything. But I think even he would completely agree that there is absolutely no story that is worth dying for. And it makes you question. I mean, Somalia, I never went back to Somalia after 1993. I never, ever went back. I still haven't been back since 1993, simply because I didn't care anymore. I don't care if the Somalis kill themselves. Really, I mean, it left. These are much stronger men than I am. It really left that bad a taste in my mouth. It affected me so much that, you know, these were people that were trying to tell the story from the Somali perspective. I mean, someone like Dan. Dan was a close friend of mine. I went to school with Dan. I grew up with him. One of the most talented photojournalists, I think, ever, and was only 22 years old. And yet, when he was called the mayor of Mogadishu, jokingly, because he used to go into Bukhara market, which was the most dangerous place in Mogadishu, would go in there in his kikoi cloth, and he would sit with the elders, and he would, you know, chew cut with them and chat with them, and he was known by everybody. And yet, these were women and children that beat him to death, along with Anthony and Hansi and Hoss. The American gunship pilot that's hovered over that incident and asked his base, you know, white Caucasian male, you know, being pursued, there are all of our troops safe? And when he gets the word back, yes, no, there's no American troops, and he doesn't do anything. Watch these guys beat Dan to death. All he had to do was fire a few rounds above the crowd, or land the helicopter, and they would have taken off, and Dan might have still been alive. But, you know, these are things that make you wonder, you know, what is the point? I mean, yes, we should tell a lot of these stories, but sometimes, for me personally, Somalia is not a story that I would want to deal with at all, ever. That's me personally, so please don't take that as the general profession. But, there are a lot of journalists that go back, but yeah. Don't want to dig your hole any deeper than I already have. That's okay.
Hi, I really enjoyed the movie, by the way. I'm a fellow sound man, and I'm wondering, with all the things you've seen and all the stories, all the horrors, what keeps you going? Why? Yeah, I take it you're still working in the industry. What keeps it fresh as such?
Can you repeat that question again, please?
So I'm just saying, why are you still doing it with all the things you've seen?
It's not the paycheck, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not.
Well, I keep on doing because it is in my blood, and I can't do any other job apart from sound or camera or journalism especially. Because now I can't drive a tractor. So I'll just continue with the job that I've had for 37 years.
Abdul, how did it feel to lose so many people from a small company like ours? We've lost a lot of people over the years. Friends of yours, what do you feel about being around? Sounds odd.
Can I just add something to what you just asked of him? I've been just documenting and observing most of this story, but one of the things I've noticed at Camera Pix and at A24, which is the sister company, is that today Abdul is still doing sound, but also has become a teacher. And there are, I don't know, Salim, how many employees at
60.
60? All of them go to him for advice, technical advice, aesthetic advice, career advice. And so I've noticed that just in the last 3 or 4 years that your role as a mentor, as a teacher has changed really significantly just since I've known you. And so that's inspiring to see.
Okay, I'll go back to Salim's question. Well, it's sad to lose, I think, 7 or 8 people in a small company. It's very sad. Because I'm the only person, and Patrick, who survived. And I don't like to talk about it because I wish they were here. They will talk for themselves. But we lost a lot of people.
And it's not just a huge, like we're saying, it's what, 60 people? It's not a huge organization where you've heard of somebody and it's just another name that you see on a group email or something. These are people you would interact with every day. You knew their families, they knew your families. So when it gets to that point and you realize this person isn't there anymore, and it's not because he died naturally, it's because he was out on assignment, you would have been with him, you could have been with him. That just makes it more painful. And I mean, this part where, there's a part of this film which I don't really like looking at. You try and think back on the happy memories of the things we did and all that, but unfortunately you will still end up getting to the point where you realize they're no longer here because of ABCD. But what I say on the other end is, they didn't fall down the stairs and die, break a neck and die. Maybe they probably died doing what they like doing best. That's how I try and console myself.
And they were very young. They were very young.
And they were very young, which is another painful part. But again, it happened. You just try and console yourself and live with the happy memories.
We'll do a couple more questions. Those three. Okay. Charlie?
Hi. I am a son of a journalist and a war journalist for like several years, and my dad, would never talk about anything when he came back at all, did he? No. No. Yeah. And it took, I mean, I think my sister and I had this sort of coming of age type thing when we asked to see some of his Rwanda videos, and he wheeled in this whole VHS, player and TV into his office, and we watched some pretty horrific stuff. I was 16 or something, so 10 years ago. And I mean, he's always been so private about it and never interested in talking about it at dinner parties or anything. It's just, he comes back. He used to say he just would go and do a weekly shop at Sainsbury's or something, and just, and he's just been to genocide in Rwanda. It's like, it's not your average day. How do you feel about your job and kind of sort of exposing a nice word, exposing your experiences in this film? How did you go into, what mindset did you have going into making this film? For my dad, it would be sort of his worst nightmare to do this, and for us all to be sitting here and watching it, because he doesn't want to deal with it. So how did you go into that in terms of your first meetings and making the film?
Maybe Chip, you want to address that?
Well, I mentioned it at the start a little bit, but the film really began with Abdul sharing stories over coffee on a very peaceful and quite positive assignment in Ethiopia. We were working for One.org, telling the story of how northwest Ethiopia had changed in a positive way since the famine of '85. So it was really a very lovely shoot for a couple of weeks, and the stories emerged out of that. And at the time, I didn't know Patrick. We started with just Abdul agreeing to participate in the film, and Salim, obviously. And then when we started looking for other interview subjects, that's when the reality check for me was there aren't that many other people from that period to talk with. So you're looking at the guys right here. But in terms of how it's impacted you guys, it's really up to you to answer that.
Did you find it cathartic?
I mean, like, I don't know how to answer that now. Some of the stories we did basically were out to inform the world what was going on, right? And I don't know whether we have a system where we compartmentalize things, whereby you decide, this is for when we're out in the field, this is for when I get home, right? Because again, the next time, we didn't have satellite phones then, right? We had, sorry, we didn't have mobile phones then. We had satellite phones that were this big, 40 kilos. And we thought we were very lucky that you could be able to make a phone call home every evening to say, I'm safe. But of course, when you start walking through the jungle, there's no power, right? You can't carry that thing in the middle of fighting. And when you come home, I mean, all you want is peace. I mean, and that's what Abdul's wife says here. That when he comes home, he doesn't want to talk much. He just wants to relax. Because the moment you open up and you tell all these horrors, what they see on TV, I mean, you've seen more than people see on TV. Most of this stuff is edited out. When you see your evening broadcast or whatever, most of this stuff is edited out because it won't run because, I don't know, families, children are watching. So it's the same thing. When you come home, you sort of like shut off a bit of that. When we meet up with Abdul, we'll remember the day we met so-and-so and we got stopped at a roadblock and we managed to lie and cheat and sneak through the roadblock and get through, and we laugh about it. Or at the end of a bad day, we sit at the bar, the hotel, or under a tree, wherever we're staying, and we share a bottle of whiskey and we laugh about what the day has been. And somehow you try and put that aside in a different compartment that maybe you shall open later, or you hope you shall never open. But you don't want to take some of those things home, because if you do, next time the phone call comes and you say, I don't know when I'll be back home. Not like today when I can answer on a Thuraya and say, you know what, I'm in the middle of here and I'm fine. We used to leave in the morning at 5 or 4 a.m. and you say, I don't know when I'll be back home. 6 weeks later, 2 months later, you rock up, dirty as God knows what, because you haven't had a chance to change your clothes. And you just say, I'm fine. And they're happy to see you. My daughter, when she was growing up, she'd look at this stranger and take off. She's not seen you. I mean, she's just in her early months, years. And she hasn't seen you. And she just take off wondering, who the hell is this? And I just, again, just try and calm down and just tell everybody it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And yes, some of our people who we worked with then, and even now, I mean, people who are exposed to such things, there's the other negative effect where basically some of us manage to almost, Salim here is totally convinced that Abdul and I are completely mad, right? But they are the other guys who Abdul and I are convinced when we see them, we know they are mad because of their behaviors. Yeah, some of them go down into this, others go down into violence, others just go downhill. They find all sorts of substances to sort out their issues, nightmares, whatever, all that sort of stuff. It's there. I mean, we're not superhuman beings now. Yeah, these things will come to you in memories, and you think, you'll go to a certain place, and you'll remember this is where. I mean, I go to Rwanda, and I think this is where, as beautiful as it is now and peaceful and supposed to be very modern, this is where there were bodies we found. This is where, in the midst of about 500 bodies, which were being put on a truck for disposal, this young, small girl woke up and realized she was still alive after 3 days, lying in the midst. So all these memories will come back, but we try and not take them home. It's like taking your work home even from an office. It's not right, is it? Because home is home.
You good?
Yeah.
His wife says
no. Let's go.
No,
His wife
sound-
says no. His
sound
wife
man.
says he's going to stay. And
Soundman never talks too much.
Miss will go to you
You
and
can
then
leave
finish up
it to
with
them.
her.
So that might defeat the question I'm about to ask, which is in relation to you've talked a lot about your roles as as sound men, and when you're there at the actual scene in terms of what's going on, and you are fantastic contemporaneous eyewitnesses. This isn't a legal question at all, but I am curious to know, when you see stories unfolding, like with the Nairobi election and the riots that happened, do you at that point feel compelled to almost take your work home with you, or to do something about it because you know the consequences of what will happen with those sorts of actions, or the sorts of routes that people follow?
Well, you kind of answered. I mean, good question. Patrick kind of answered that a little bit in the film, where he said, in 2007, when we saw what was happening in Kenya, there were flashbacks of Rwanda, and you tried to tell people that this is you really don't want to go down this route because of the consequences of what we've seen. But how much we can do? I mean, we can tell that story. We can keep hammering on about it, but often it's not the ordinary people that want to do these things. It is the people in power, it's the politicians, it's a small group of people that are orchestrating a lot of these events for their own benefit. You know, the Kenyan elections was not. Yes, there were tribal issues. There were root causes of some of the hatred, but this was fueled by the politicians. And unfortunately, sometimes, no matter what the media says or does, these guys want to. They want to complete that process because they have something to gain out of it, and that's we can only tell those stories as much as possible. Often we're telling, and this is one of our failures, I think, as the media, again, I'm being very general, is we don't often point out the problems before they actually start. We kind of react to the stories as opposed to doing something about it before it happens. We're reacting to it, so we're always playing catch up almost, and we're just reporting what's happening rather than giving context beforehand, trying to prevent it. And in 2007 in Kenya, the media was hugely complicit in what happened in that election because the media had taken sides and really had caused a lot of the tension that then boiled over into what we saw.
You know, one thing I would add to that, because I was with these guys in Kenya in the post-election and working alongside them, and one of the things that I've found over the years is I get to go home. It doesn't matter when we were in Afghanistan or Darfur, wherever. I know that at some point I'm going to leave, and then it's not my story anymore. But I noticed with you guys in Kenya, a very different energy that the three of them had, because they were at home. There was nowhere else to go. This was very, very serious. And you know, when Eldoret happened, the church, it really did look like Rwanda, and there was nowhere for you to go. So your daughter who's here, it's like, no, you weren't going to fly to another country. It's like, however that played out, it wound up becoming more peaceful over time. But however it played out, there was nowhere for you to go. It's a different story as a journalist.
I'm not sure we've answered the question, but I hope that's okay. Just because I know we have to close down, Juliana. Tim, you want to do the...
I mean, firstly,
please.
In 2007, 2008, and before that, there's no international news editor in the world that would have paid for a feed of a story about something that might happen. So I don't think local news, perhaps, or domestic news, but in terms of international, I don't think there was any complicity or can be in that sense, because you don't make the calls as to what gets fed, what gets broadcast, whatever. No, the point I wanted to make was, certainly from my experiences, there was a point earlier about, you know, how do you speak to your kids? How do you deal with life at home when you've seen the most horrible, horrible things? It may be different in Rwanda, Somalia, wherever, but certainly, again, from my experience, for every 5 or so really unpleasant things, you do see some of the most incredible bits of humanity and people going out of their way, local people going out of their way to make sure that you're safe, to give you their last bit of food, to make sure that they'll fix your car when it's in a rut or whatever, when you're being chased. I wondered if that was also your experience, because that's what I have focused on and other people have focused on when speaking to kids, because it's not all gloom.
It's a good way to end it. Great stories, guys, things that made you smile.
In the 90s, just after the Americans and the UN coalition was formed, we had a house which we used to call the Reuters Villa in Mogadishu. It was a multiple storied house. We had about 12 guards, we had cars, all of them armed, everything. And in the evenings, Anthony, the late, and I sometimes would take a walk down the road without guards or anything. After dinner, we'd take a walk. There were street lights, right? And the street lights were organized by a guy called Elman. He was a Somali, crazy looking, completely crazy looking. The American Marines loved him. He was called Elman the electrician. And he had dreadlocks. For a Somali, I mean, that's quite an achievement. And on the main street, he had this huge, he repaired generators, the Americans and the UN supplied him with fuel because he was actually putting up streetlights. And in the evenings, we'd actually go and sit with him and just chat and talk and talk and talk. Of course, he's happy on his chewing his this narcotic leaf, the mirar, the cat. So he's on a different high. We're on the other side on a different high. And you'd realize if you had more and more of these people, such people, I mean, this would end up really well. I mean, he had put up street lights almost, I'd say maybe a quarter of the main residential areas of Mogadishu. Because the UN would put up lights outside their bases, the Americans, whoever the other soldiers were. WFP would put up outside because they had huge generators, ICRC and the rest. And he was just doing his own bit. And unfortunately, when Al-Shabaab came in, they killed him. So there was that nice part to seeing somebody trying to make good something. But unfortunately, clearly somebody didn't appreciate that. But at that time, I mean, we used to love the guy. We used to go and stop over, call him Elman, we just sit with him, and we just walk back at midnight because the whole area is just lit. Yeah, even now, I don't think you can do that anymore. But yeah, that's one of my happy things that I remember about Somalia.
Abdul, any happy people that you met?
No. Completely, they are all mad. I like to talk about them. I hate them.
Okay, well, so thank you. I just want to say a very big thank you here to Jim and Sue Town. You know, they made it possible for us to be here, for all of us to get here and to do this screening. So please give them a round of applause.